Crime is sexy.
As this man was being taken away, the Mexican army showered his hideout with divine wrath while he was still under the influence of alcohol. He then turned around and threatened the soldier, telling him, "You have no idea who you're messing with." However, they were perfectly aware who they were messing with. In this video, we'll be doing a deep dive into none other than Santiago Meza Lopez, one of the most mysterious and important figures in the drug trade. Make sure you subscribe for more videos. Just a few days after his capture, a group of cartel hitmen made an unsuccessful attempt to free him from his cell in which he was being held. The Arellano Felix cartel was one such organization. It was led by the equally notorious Arellano brothers, Benjamin Arellano Felix and Ramon Arellano Felix. If you're wondering why cartel members would bother to free a man who was foolish enough to get caught, the answer is that one such group was the Arellano Felix cartel. This dynamic duo controlled important trade routes from Tijuana into Baja California, which the Sinaloa cartel also desired because they ran from Tijuana into Baja California. It was inevitable that this competition would escalate into violence, and it did so in a way that Mexico had never seen before. Kidnappings, murders, and espionage were all part of this period of unprecedented high levels of bloodshed. Because of the violence that was associated with the cartel, an annual average of 30,000 people went missing between the years of 1996 and the late 2000s. As the number of reported cases of missing persons increased, the authorities were forced to deal with a difficult conundrum. Where were all of the bodies? In the year 1964, Santiago Meza Lopez was born into the world. Santiago was born into poverty, as were many Sinaloans of the time, and to make matters even more difficult for him, he had 9 siblings. Because of these challenging circumstances, Santiago had to learn how to be self-sufficient at a young age. Santiago had already established himself as a mason by the time he was an adult, and he was so proficient at his work that at some point in the late 1980s, members of the Arellano Felix organization took notice of him. At that time, the organization had just been established. Masonry work was one of the first things he did for them, but over time he took on more responsibilities. In the year 1996, the Arellano brothers sought the counsel of mysterious criminals operating in other countries who had prior experience in the art of making bodies vanish. Their recommendation was surprisingly straightforward. Instead of disposing of the bodies by throwing them away, turn the flesh into paste and grind up their bones. The cartels were made aware of the critical nature of their situation when they realized that if they were unable to devise a successful strategy for disposing of the bodies, those bodies would serve as a trail that would lead investigators directly to them, resulting in their arrest. The Arellano brothers gave the task of finding a suitable person to the drug lords Efren Perez and George Arellano Felix, and at the time Santiago Meza Lopez was the obvious choice. So they decided to conduct a small experiment with the man. The only problem was that they needed someone that they could trust with this simple yet sickening task because on the one hand, it was going to be a long-term gig, and on the other hand, there was a heaping pile of bodies begging to be disposed of. The only problem was trust. They needed someone they could trust with this simple yet sickening task. I don't know what was going through Santiago's mind as he carried out the strange experiment, but I'm fairly certain that it was fairly self-explanatory because Santos passed away after a period of 6 months. Santiago was given permission to enter a room that contained a cylindrical drum measuring 200 liters and filled with a corrosive solution consisting of caustic soda, water, and a few other chemicals. The disintegration of the body typically took about 8 hours, and when it was done, Santiago would often be left with shards of bone, teeth, and nails, which he would then set on fire and bury in fields. Santiago made it a habit to double or even triple the amount of solution he needed. He put a large sum of money into the purchase of oil barrels. He bought enough latex gloves for an entire year's supply, and gas masks that protected him and his crew from the horrible odors and fumes that came from the bodies that were liquefying. Barrels of human liquefaction were transported by pickup trucks at night and dumped down cliffs and canyons in remote areas where no one would think to look. However, as Santiago gained more experience in this gruesome trade, he developed a more efficient drain. Hominy and meat are the two main components of the traditional Mexican stew known as pozole. Other ingredients are used as toppings. The motion of stirring the bodies in this mixture has a similar appearance and sensation to stirring a pot of pozole whilst it's on fire. Santiago was obedient, and the fact that he survived long enough to be arrested shows that he never gave his bosses any cause for complaint, as evidenced by the fact that he survived long enough to be arrested. During the course of this gruesome routine, Santiago began to do direct work for the extremely ruthless Teodoro Garcia Cimento, also known as El Tio, who was employed by the Ariana Felix organization. El Tio was an expert in extortion and kidnapping, and the majority of his kidnapped victims frequently ended up in Santiago's El Tio, and other members of the crew were having fun in the Baja's central neighborhood, playing loud music with sex workers while someone in the neighborhood informed the police of the identity of the loud neighbors. The government of Mexico was promptly informed by the police at that point. Santiago was eventually placed at position number 20 on the FBI's list of the most wanted men. However, he was able to stay one step ahead of the authorities for a period of 4 years before being captured in 2009. In 2012, Santiago Meza Lopez was given a sentence of 10 years in prison for charges related to organized crime. Despite the fact that liquefied remains are still being discovered every other month, and despite the fact that Santiago has not denied the heinous crime, he has not been charged with it. The number of dead in Santiago was nowhere near 300, but rather in the tens of thousands. After some time, at least 14,000 to 15,000 pieces of skeletal remains were found in another location that Santiago frequented called La Galleria. There have been a number of instances in the past in which the government has been linked to the cartel, and a large number of people believe that corrupt officials are protected from justice by the government. This year, El Pozolero will be eligible for release from prison after having served his 10-year sentence. His release is causing a great deal of concern, particularly among the families of the people he's harmed in the past. All that these families want is justice, and it's highly unlikely that they'll ever get the remains of their loved ones back. However, they will get justice. When it comes to whether or not El Pozolero will be held accountable for the terrible crimes he committed,